I want to continue with Dr. Bergman's idea of the other day. It really inspired me. Disease as adaptation. Diseases as adaptation. As the human species evolved during the past million years through natural selection, many pathological viruses and bacteria came and went from our species, and the strongest survived and created a viable progeny. Evolution is a slow and resistant process. They say a fast genetic change is a 1% change in the genome in a century. A fast genetic change would be a 1% change in the genome in a century. When I say genome, of course, you all know what that means. In your body, every one of your cells has its own DNA, which makes each cell particularly you, and that we have, as a species, in the past million years, have evolved our own particular species DNA known as the human genome. So that's what we're talking about. We're confronted with challenges to our immune system through the environment. We have to work our way through microbial challenges, environmental toxicity challenges. And what is happening right now in the past 100 years is a particularly sinister type of environmental challenge to our species known as processed food. Right. So I have a full day seminar, it's actually accredited, and I go through the history of before the FDA. Does anybody know what the name of that government agency was before 1910 rather? The previous iteration of the FDA was known as?
The Chemical Board.
Close, the Bureau of Chemistry, and it was headed up by a brilliant, very ethical man named Harvey Wiley, MD. Yeah. So, and he had the outrageous idea that foods produced by American manufacturers should not be adulterated or harmful to humans in any way. Can you imagine that extravagant idea at the time? Now, of course, this dangerous lunatic was soon replaced by somebody a little more sane when the Bureau of Chemistry was replaced by the FDA a couple of years later. But the point is, as far as our DNA goes, you know that recently, in the past few years, the human genome has been decoded, right? And surprisingly, it turned out that it's not millions of genes, it's only about 35,000. So that was a big surprise. Here's the other surprise. The active part of human DNA is only what? 3% of it. What's the other 90% of the DNA? It's unknown. It's unknown. The best theories on what the 97% comprises microbial attempts at destroying the human species that failed, and they're inactive viruses, inactive pathogens. That's one theory. So, be that as it may, I'm trying to introduce the idea of environmental inputs, which are known as epigenetic effects on our DNA structure from the environment, and getting back to processed foods. As you know, enzymes are the way that we digest and metabolize the three main types of foods that we ingest, which include protein, fats, and carbohydrates. Very good. So the metabolism of each one of those types of foods is known as digestion, and that requires digestive enzymes in order to accomplish that. Well, here's the problem. In the past 100 years, we have created this brand new food industry which has been predicated upon the idea that we must remove, scientifically, we must remove the enzymes from the food for one and only one purpose, which is shelf life. Whoever said that, right? Shelf life. So now we have all these non-foods that make up about 80% of the foods available on the shelves in the grocery stores, right? My friend, can you get me a cup of water back there, please? Thank you. So here's the problem. Humans have never evolved the enzymes that can metabolize Doritos. Remember, evolution is a very, very slow process. These scientifically processed foods have only been around for a century. We haven't had time to evolve enzymes that can recognize them. Humans don't have the enzymes that can metabolize Haagen-Dazs, Snickers, white bread, trans fatty acids. Remember, trans fatty acids are a man-made invention. They don't exist in nature. The problem is, so what happens when 80% of your diet consists of food for which our species does not have the ability to manufacture enzymes? What happens is leaky gut syndrome. Those undigested foods, they cause an inflammatory, they remain in the stomach, cause an inflammatory process in the stomach, causing reflux in 20% of the population. Finally, by gravity, they go down to the small intestine. They can't be broken down and absorbed in the small intestine and go into the systemic circulation as nutrition because they're intact, right? As Pringles, right? And they finally descend into their last chance, into the colon, and again, they can't be broken down there. So then what happens? Through leaky gut syndrome, these intact, man-made fats, proteins, and carbohydrates become introduced in the systemic circulation. Once in the blood, digestion can no longer occur. Once in the blood, digestion can no longer occur. At that time, these non-food, man-made Frankenstein foods are free to take up residence in virtually any organ or tissue. And I've just described the pathophysiology of most of arthritis, any kind of itis. Gastroenterologists call it hyperpermeability syndrome. So, inflammation, it is a primary tool of the immune response. It's not a dysfunction. When you give your kid, a little kid, an entire quart of chocolate ice cream from Safeway or wherever, and her eyes start watering, nose starts running, coughing, because you do that every night, well, we are trained to regard those natural clearing mechanisms of the body as disease, when in effect, they are the sign that our immune system is actually working and that the person is healthy. When poisons come into the body, there should be a reaction. That's how we survived as a species this long. So allergy in this sense is not a dysfunction. It is an evolved immune defense against acute toxicity. Between 1980 and 2000, allergy cases doubled in the US. And then between 2000 and 2011, they doubled again. Now they're well on their way to doubling a third time. A lot of this can be attributed to vaccines, because during the same time, the number of vaccines on the mandated schedule we're giving our kids tripled. The rest of that increase can probably be attributed mostly to processed foods. Nutrition and the food that we eat is not something that affects our health. The food you eat determines your health. But 80% of our population, this is right out of Udo Erasmus' book, Fats That Heal, 80% of our population eats 80% of their diet as processed foods. And don't we all know this?